Welcome to the debate.
Good to be here.
Today is January 31st, 2026. And, if you have been tracking the sheer volume of paper moving across commercial desks in the South Bay this week, the narrative has just fundamentally shifted. The pause button isn't just released, it feels like it's been smashed. We're looking at market reports hitting our desks late this month describing a great unpause, or what the optimists are calling a real estate thaw.
Thaw is almost too polite a word for it. I mean, when you look at the transaction velocity in certain zip codes right now, it feels more like a dam breaking. The liquidity is back, and it is moving fast.
It certainly is. And the signal to noise is, it's deafening. Just look at the calendar. Today is the deadline for El Segundo business registration renewals. That is usually a pretty mundane administrative date, but this year it's signaling this massive retention of active business cycles. We have residential inventory in North Redondo and Holly Glen turning over in an average of 16 days, driven heavily by the SpaceX expansion. And then the signal that I think everyone is talking about, Molina Healthcare.
That's the anchor. Yeah, that deal changes the entire conversation.
Exactly. Molina Healthcare securing a massive, a 100,000 square foot lease at the Topaz office tower in San Pedro. That's not a small bet. That is institutional confidence returning to the waterfront in a way we just haven't seen in years.
It's a headline deal, absolutely. It directly challenges that whole office is dead narrative. And frankly, it puts San Pedro right back on the map as a corporate hub.
And that deal, it brings us to the central friction we're debating today. In an environment heating up this fast, where inventory is vanishing in 2 weeks and corporate giants are taking down six-figure square footage, does the commercial real estate broker need to, fundamentally reinvent their existence? We're dissecting the thesis presented by Voxel Micro Video Labs in their new CRE Revolution Guide. And the argument is stark. The traditional smile and dial brokerage model is dead. To survive this specific wave, brokers must pivot to become media companies.
And that is exactly where I have to pump the brakes. See, I look at that same data, 16-day turnover, massive corporate leases, and I see a market that rewards speed and fundamentals, not, video editing skills. My argument is pretty simple. In a market this hot, edutainment is a distraction. Abandoning the hustle of the cold call for a studio setup might just be a fatal error when the deal velocity is this high.
I understand the skepticism, I do. When the fish are jumping into the boat, why learn to build a better net? But let me frame my position here. I believe we're at a definitive tipping point in how trust is manufactured. The Voxel CRE Authority Blueprint, and this was authored by Edwin Duterte and Jennifer Wolfe, it makes a really compelling case that the old ways of cold calls, postcards, and, information asymmetry are fading.
Fading implies they don't work. I'd argue they are just as effective, maybe even more so, when inventory is this scarce.
But effective at what cost? Look at the buyer profile. We aren't just selling to old guard landlords anymore. We're talking about tech professionals from SpaceX driving the mixed-use surge in Hawthorne. We're talking about sophisticated institutional capital moving into San Pedro. The smile and dial model, just grinding through a list of strangers, is, to quote the source material, exhausting, inefficient, and invisible to this demographic. My position is that to capture the momentum of this unpause, brokers have to use media to provide radical transparency. You can't beg for business one call at a time. You have to make 5,000 warm calls simultaneously through broadcasting.
That's a lovely image, the 5,000 warm calls. It really is. But let's look at the logistics of the deal. If homes and small commercial units in Holly Glen are selling in 16 days, the problem isn't visibility. The problem is access. In a thaw like this, aggressive traditional sales tactics win because you are intercepting the decision maker before they even have time to open YouTube. You're getting the contract signed while the quote-unquote media broker is still setting up their lighting.
But are you building a business, or are you just catching a falling knife?
I'm catching checks. I am. Very skeptical about this shift to becoming a market oracle, which, let's be honest, effectively means giving away your data for free. Historically, a broker's value, their paycheck, relied on privileged information. I know something you don't. If you broadcast all the data on why the market is moving, you might just be arming your client to do the deal without you. Insight is expensive, and I worry this model just devalues the broker's core asset.
Okay,
Let's dig right into that, because that is the first major pillar of the Voxel Guide, the death of the cold call. Specifically, episode 1 of their guide describes cold calling as a low-status activity. It argues that when you cold call, you are psychologically positioning yourself as a beggar.
The entire industry. Low status? It's a service industry. You are serving a client by bringing them an opportunity. What's low status about that?
It is a service, but consider the power dynamic. In a sophisticated economy, like the one we're seeing in El Segundo right now, high-value clients and investors, they respond to authority. They do not respond well to interruption. The thesis here is that when you interrupt a stranger, you start the relationship at a deficit. You're asking for their time. But when you broadcast expert content, when you put out a video detailing exactly why San Pedro is the future hub before you ask for the meeting, you're attracting investors who already respect your intellect. You become a prize to be won, not a pest to be blocked.
Everyone wants to be the prize. I get it. It appeals to the ego. But let's go back to the timeline again. 16 days. That's barely 2 weeks. If I spend 3 days scripting, filming, and editing some high-production video at the Voxel studio to build authority, that property in North Redondo is already in escrow.
Well, you're assuming the video is reactive, that you're filming a specific building. The Voxel strategy is about being proactive.
But a broker needs to eat today. The so-called low-status activity of picking up the phone is immediate. It cuts through the noise. The Voxel Guide, it talks about Phase 2 and catching the white whale, the investor with a 1031 exchange deadline. Now, for our listeners who might not be in the weeds, a 1031 exchange is a tax code provision that lets an investor defer taxes by selling one property and very quickly buying another.
Exactly. The 1031 exchange magnet.
Right. But that investor has a strict 45-day window to identify a new property. It is a panic situation. Do they have time to browse a media empire channel? Or do they need someone who calls them at 7 a.m. and says, I know you're under the gun and I have a property that fits your criteria right here? The white whale usually needs a lifeboat, not a lecture series.
I agree, they need a lifeboat, 100%, but I disagree on how they look for it. The video essay is the reason they answer your call at 7 a.m. Or, more accurately, it's the reason they call you at 6 a.m. The 1031 investor is panicked, yes, so they are searching for solutions in the South Bay. If they Google San Pedro investment opportunities and find your content explaining exactly how to navigate that tax problem in this specific market, you become their financial savior. You aren't selling a building, you're selling a solution to a massive tax liability. That positioning commands a much higher level of trust than a cold solicitation from a number they don't recognize.
If they find you, that's the gamble. You're betting on the algorithm versus betting on your own dialing thumb. But let's move to the second pillar of this revolution, the whole idea of the market oracle.
This is episode 2, the pocket listing myth.
Correct. The claim is that hoarding data makes you poor. But I have to challenge this. In 2026, yes, basic data is free. Everyone knows Molina signed the lease. That's public record. But the nuance, the pocket listing, the quiet knowledge that a specific landlord in Torrance is ready to sell before it hits the MLS, that is the broker's leverage.
I'm just not convinced that secret knowledge is a sustainable business model anymore. The Voxel argument is that in 2026, hoarding creates suspicion, not value. The broker's value isn't knowing that SpaceX is hiring. It's explaining why that hiring spree is driving specific trends in North Redondo housing or Holly Glen commercial strips. It's the synthesis of data, not just the possession of it.
But you can explain that synthesis one-on-one. You don't need to broadcast it to the whole world.
When you broadcast it, you create gravity. You attract buyers you didn't even know existed. If you were the one publicly decoding the great unpause, explaining the implications of the El Segundo renewals, you become the authority for the entire region. The argument is that you don't lose deals by sharing secrets. You gain market share because people trust the person who turns on the lights.
I just worry it's a slippery slope into entertainment rather than business. The guide talks about cap rate edutainment and making math sexy.
That's episode 3.
Yes, turning spreadsheets into must-watch TV. And I have to ask,
Do serious investors really want must-watch TV? A cap rate is just the net operating income divided by the asset value. It's a metric of risk and return. Do we really need to make that sexy? I feel like this strategy risks trivializing the financial seriousness of these transactions. You're trying to entertain a CFO who just wants to know if the numbers pencil out.
I think you're underestimating the boredom factor. Even CFOs are human. The point isn't to dumb down the math. It's to make the analysis digestible and, yeah, engaging. A PDF is static. It's dead data. A video where a passionate expert walks you through the why of the numbers, using the Voxel Studio screens to visualize the cap rate sensitivity. That sticks. It differentiates you from the 5 other brokers sending flat spreadsheets. It shows you understand the narrative behind the numbers.
I suppose there's value in presentation, but let's talk about where this presentation is applied. We mentioned the industrial sector. With the business cycle renewing today, industrial is huge.
Absolutely. Episode 6, the industrial pivot. This is one of the strongest arguments for the media strategy, in my opinion, specifically because industrial real estate is so visually unappealing.
Then I find it one of the most questionable. The advice is to stop selling curb appeal and start selling logistics capacity.
Correct, because let's be honest, a warehouse in Torrance is usually just an ugly concrete box. You cannot sell it on beauty.
It is, and nobody buys it for beauty.
So how do you market it? The Voxel thesis is that you have to film the boring concrete warehouse to showcase what it does. You need high-end production to make that concrete box look like a gold mine for an e-commerce tenant. You show the ceiling height not just as a number on a page, but visually demonstrating the racking capacity. You show the loading docks in action. You make the ugly functional and exciting.
But does a logistics manager at an e-commerce firm need a cinematic trailer for a loading dock? They care about the technical specs. They care about the turning radius for their trucks. Can an 18-wheeler get in and out? These are binary data points. Yes or no.
Visuals verify data, and they communicate it instantly.
But is it worth the production costs? We're talking about utilizing a full studio, lights, cameras, editing. This feels like over-marketing a utilitarian asset class. Industrial tenants are pragmatic. They aren't buying a lifestyle. They're buying cubic footage.
They're buying efficiency. And if you can visually demonstrate how that specific warehouse improves their logistics efficiency, using a well-produced video that highlights flow, lighting, and capacity, you are speaking their language better than a spec sheet does. It's about communication bandwidth. Video conveys logistics capacity instantly. A spec sheet requires interpretation. If I can show a logistics manager, look, your trucks can turn here, and here is how the flow works. I've just saved them a site visit. That is value.
Okay, I'll concede that video helps with visualization, but I'm wary of the gold mine narrative. It still feels like we're trying to dress up a pig. But let's look at the broker's business model itself. The Voxel guide suggests a shift that I find practically very difficult. The retainer model?
Episode 9, the asset management play. This is the economic shift for the broker.
Right. Moving from commissions to retainers.
This is crucial for stabilizing the broker's income. We all know the tenant rep trap, described in episode 4. Chasing tenants is a roller coaster. You run around town showing space, and if they don't sign, you make zero. The position here is that you need to become owner-centric. You provide quarterly video reports, market analysis, and advisory services to landlords, and for that, you charge a retainer. You become an asset manager, not just a transactional agent.
That is a massive scope creep. Brokers are licensed to sell and lease real estate. We are not financial advisors, and we are not property managers, unless we have those specific designations and contracts.
But the market is demanding that level of advisory.
But will landlords pay for it? That's the real question. Will a landlord pay a monthly retainer for a video report? Or will they just say, lease my building and I'll pay you a commission when you succeed? The retainer model assumes landlords value the content as much as the result. I would argue they only value the result.
I think they value the intelligence that leads to the result. In a volatile market like the unpause we're seeing, landlords are anxious. They want to know their asset is being watched and managed strategically. A quarterly high-production video report analyzing their specific asset against the San Pedro or El Segundo market trends, that provides peace of mind. It proves you're working even when a deal isn't closing. It justifies a fee that smooths out the peaks and valleys of commission income. It turns a gig economy job into a professional consultancy.
It sounds like a lot of work for a fee that might be hard to collect. And it distracts from the core job, filling the vacancy. If I'm spending my time making quarterly reports for a retainer, I'm not on the phone finding a tenant.
But if you have built a media empire, the tenants are finding you. That's the loop. You aren't hunting, you are farming.
Again, that's assuming the empire works. I want to touch on the legacy aspect briefly before we close. Episode 10 talks about the exit strategy.
Yes, selling the brand, not the Rolodex.
The idea that you can't sell a contact list, a Rolodex, but you can sell a media channel.
Well, it's true. A Rolodex is personal. It relies on your voice on the phone. A YouTube channel with subscribers, a library of deal anatomy deep dives, which is episode 7, that is an asset with equity value. It can operate without you. You can execute a warm handoff to a successor because the audience trusts the brand, not just the individual.
That assumes the audience stays. People follow personalities. If the personality leaves, the empire might crumble just as fast as a Rolodex.
Not if you've built a system. And that brings us to the infrastructure. Voxel Micro Video Labs has set up a physical studio in San Pedro. This isn't just about having an iPhone. It's about a dedicated space to create this content professionally.
And that location is key, San Pedro.
It is. The Voxel thesis is, the future is waiting in San Pedro. And with the Molina lease, well, they seem to be right. They are positioning themselves right at the epicenter of the unpause.
I won't argue against San Pedro. The fundamentals there are just undeniable. But let's bring this to a close.
Agreed. To summarize my perspective, the South Bay economy is transforming. We have entered the great unpause. We have major players like Molina and SpaceX reshaping the landscape. In this environment, the smile and dial broker is, I believe, invisible. The market demands transparency, authority, and high-fidelity communication. The Voxel Guide offers a roadmap to stop being a vendor and start building a dynasty. And the studio in San Pedro is the necessary infrastructure to make that pivot. If you aren't broadcasting, you're dying.
And I'll maintain that while video is a powerful tool, it is not a replacement for the fundamental grind. The old ways aren't dead as long as they generate leases. In a market where inventory turns over in 16 days, speed and direct access matter more than production value. I'd warn against prioritizing building an audience over building a deal sheet. The deal anatomy deep dive is great, but you need a deal to dissect first. And that requires competence, negotiation skills, and yes, sometimes picking up the phone and interrupting someone to give them good news.
It's a fascinating clash of philosophies. Is it a media revolution, or is it just a hot market lifting all boats?
That is the question. The opportunity is clearly there. The unpause is real.
It is. And for our listeners, the 10-part guide from Voxel is out there. It challenges you to decide if you are ready to sit in the hot chair or if you'll stick to the phone.
Whichever you choose, just make sure you catch the wave, because with 16-day turnover, it will not wait for you.
Indeed. Thank you for listening to The Debate.
Until next time.